So, returning to the task of church reform, the pinnacle of medieval papacy, and Pope Innocent III, and the founding of the papal state is what I was just discussing. Um, the Fourth Lateran Council um, was very significant. And this was in the 13th century, 1215, held in Rome. It declared another crusade, but I think more importantly in the long-term effect, especially focusing on what we're talking about here, this really solidified uniformity of Catholicism and in the rites. I mean, keep in mind, Catholicism is a Latin term that means universalism. This is the universal church, and one would expect that it would have the same um, rituals no matter where you would go as a Catholic. And so this really gave a kind of sense of like a global solidarity, a community. You might be a Catholic and you go to a church in a different country, and to this day, right, you can do communion and things look the same. And especially back then, this crackdown, this authoritarianism within the church did also create this consistency so that you could be a Catholic and go anywhere in a Catholic state and you're going to find yourself a safe haven in the church, and you're going to be familiar even if you don't know the language, even if you don't know Latin, but you're going to hear Latin. You're going to hear a church service that's going to sound the same. So there's that sense of being a part of the universal church. Okay, and that was something that was, I think, very sophisticated in terms of creating this identity, and that also would give a lot of power to the church because now, if you're German and you're, near Spain or the Kingdom of France, and you have these different cultures and these people that you may not like because they don't speak your language, you don't like their food, but they share the same religious practices. And so you have that going. And the church is not always going to be able by any means to get Catholics from stop fighting Catholics, but there is that kind of sense there. Islam later we'll find has a concept of the ummah, the global Muslim community, same kind of ideal in any way. Okay. And so this is what we had going here. Look at the universal monarchy of Pope Innocent III. If you look here, it says the color here, the papal states under him, and then vassal states of him. And we see what, if you read the book, you see what he did to the King of England, where he basically did the interdict on him and was able to really set him up as a vassal. And then other places that there was intervention. So there was a lot of power in his hands, and in a way that many of us will probably never see again. But it wasn't gonna last. In doing that, there were certain aspects of the legacy of this time period that lasted. But essentially, we take Boniface the seventh, who was ruling from 1294 to 1303. He overreached, and he wasn't able to pull off what those before him did. And as the textbook mentions, he ends up, King Philip accuses him of heresy. And I was saying, out of all the things he did, and he was quite a controversial character, heresy was not one of them, but that's what he was accused of. Agents arrested him, and he died shortly after. And the book says he died with the papal monarchy as well. So we see that the Pope will maintain a lot of power, but never to that degree again as a papal monarchy. Just a quick side note. In Islam, you generally have had the powers. You've had the caliphs, But then you had kings or sultans, and then Islamic courts, or shahs in Islamic courts. And the Islamic Revolution of Iran in the 70s, Ayatollah Khomeini wrote a treaty that was not widely read called Valiyati Faqih, and it means rule by the jurist. And his theory was that the Islamic clerics, since they know God's law, should actually be the ones that directly rule a country. That was a radical idea. And even when the revolution happened, many didn't see that that was really going to be implemented. So the Islamic State in Iran is kind of like what this state, these papal monarchies were like, where the clergy take almost direct rule, right? But for the most part, you see that the kings are the rulers, and then there is a shared power with the monarchs. In the case leading up to the fall of Boniface, you really are almost seeing that the real power is in the church, right? Currently in Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is the clergy that have direct power. The ayatollahs, the supreme ayatollahs do. So when President Ahmadinejad came and they were calling him a dictator, the president of Iran can't even, he's not even the head of the military. He can't even declare an act of war. All the power really is in the Ayatollah, which you barely ever see on there. Now, I diverged. I wanted to point out, one, that Christianity and Islam, they have a tradition of politics being mixed with religion, both. And there's times when the clergy have had more power at the expense of secular rulers and opposite. And so I just wanted to point out that what we see is unprecedented power, such as in Iran, of the clergy, even more so than that exists in Saudi Arabia. Not necessarily the norm. Same for this now. Okay, the Pope certainly doesn't have the kind of power that you see here. Now, let's also talk about religious outcasts. It makes sense that in an environment like this, that your religion isn't just a personal affair. It's a social one. And if the monarchs and the church have this total integrated relationship, then also what that implies is that Catholicism is the religion that you would be to be in agreement with the ruling authority. The very act of not being a Catholic, an Orthodox Catholic, meaning like following it by the T, it implies an act of rebellion. It's a political act of rebellion. It doesn't matter if your ideas are extremely similar to the church. You then are by default questioning the authority of the secular authorities and the church authority. So you see, this is the atmosphere that's created. This is why actually, in this time period, Islam is a more tolerant religion. Islam allows for more diversity, not in the way that comparing to a modern society now. Okay, Jews do far better in the Islamic world than these time periods, and you have Christians who are doing better in the Islamic world. You're not going to last too long as any other religion during these time periods than unless you're Roman Catholic. And Jews will maybe be allowed, but they'll also suffer tremendously. And so I just thought that I would point that out because there is that difference. For Islam, all is the Christians and the Jews have to do is acknowledge its political supremacy, not its religious. That's interesting, right? Islam's power base is it will humiliate Christians and Jews. It'll lower them. It will give them a tax that Muslims don't have to pay. But it allows them to exist nonetheless under this kind of like the yoke of the political supremacy of Islam. While here we're seeing in the West that there's just the church. Essentially, that's what it comes down to. So then we get to the issue of heretics and what happens here. And as a side note, Islam kind of does its own little inquisitions from here and there against Muslim ideologies, less so against Christians or Jews, but more like Islam Islamic schisms. And here we're seeing this right here as well. I will return to this theme next.